Welcome to Behavioral Grooves, the podcast that explores why we do what we do at the intersection of human behavior, science, and the real world. I'm Kurt Nelson.
And I'm Tim Houlihan. Today, we're exploring a topic that's essential to both personal growth and organizational success: innovation. And not just any aspect of innovation, but specifically the fascinating crossroads where innovation meets behavioral science.
Innovation is often seen as this mysterious process that only certain creative types can tap into. But our guests today make a compelling case that innovation is actually hardwired into our DNA as humans, and that we're all innovators by nature. Yet, despite innovation being part of who we are, many organizations don't allow that and struggle with it, and we don't identify as innovators.
Even though surveys show most business leaders rank innovation as one of their top three priorities, many admit that they don't feel prepared to actually make it happen. So, what's going on here? What gets in the way of our natural innovative tendencies? And more importantly, what can we do about it?
Yeah, so to dig into these questions, we're joined by two exceptional experts who spent decades helping organizations unlock their innovative potential.
Our first guest is Matt Arnold, Principal for Services, Strategy, and Solutions at Brightidea. Matt brings over 2 decades of professional experience in design, brand, product management, team dynamics, and innovation.
And we also have with us the wonderful Adam Hansen, Principal and Vice President of Behavioral Innovation at Ideas to Go. Adam has been leading teams through the creative process for over 23 years, facilitating hundreds of sessions across industries ranging from consumer packaged goods to healthcare and financial services.
Together, they offer complementary perspectives on why innovation matters, what blocks it, and how we can create environments where innovation will flourish. They're both good friends and fellow musical types, so we always end up in good conversations about great music with them. More importantly, they're compatriots in our effort to bring behavioral science out of the lab and into the field.
Yeah, and they're both great examples of how to do good behavioral science in the real world. Okay, throughout our conversation, you'll hear some practical insights about innovation as both a mindset and a discipline, something that requires intention, practice, and an understanding of our cognitive biases.
We'll also explore how negativity bias can kill good ideas before they even have a chance to develop, why constraints can actually enhance creativity, and why having brain breaks might be more important than a marathon brainstorming session.
Oh, I love that. So, we'll also discuss why innovation shouldn't be limited to specialized department, but maybe should be embedded throughout the entire organization and be part of their culture.
So, whether you're a business leader looking to foster more innovation in your team or just someone interested in tapping into your own creative potential, this episode has something to offer.
So, let's dive in with our first question. What is innovation anyway? And Matt Arnold kicks it off.
The short-ish answer is, I believe it is a mindset and it's a practice. When I work with many of my customers and when I was teaching innovation courses, the shorthand definition I use is that it's something that creates and captures new value.
I like that. I like that.
Adam, how would you frame it? Let's just get a counterpoint on that, or if there is.
I like to go with just the very modest approach that innovation is who we are. It is. You look at all other species, and you don't see what we have in ours. We're that strand of DNA that produced a Da Vinci, Billie Holiday, Michael Phelps, a Marie Curie, a Brunelleschi, et cetera, et cetera. So we are, as Darwin said, we're not the fastest nor the strongest, but we are the greatest at adapting and at hacking. And we're just the stupendous, badass master adapters. And so we need to understand that that comes pre-installed. We come with that fully onboarded, loaded. And we just need to let cultural assumptions not choke that out of us.
Well, but I think that's a really interesting part, that cultural norms or expectations choke it out of us, because there's so many people, myself sometimes included, where it's like, I'm not an innovator. I don't innovate. This isn't me. And yet, what I'm hearing both of you say is no, that's part of it's a mindset that we have to have, but it's also part of who we are. So how do we overcome those societal pieces or our own self-doubt, the imposter syndrome that we might have around this?
I think it's a great question, and part of me, I think back to kind of the notion that culture eats strategy for breakfast. Right?
Yeah.
I think it's the same with innovation. Right? Innovation is usually top of mind for business leaders, but they in recent surveys, you'll see that leaders will usually put innovation in one of their top three kind of priorities for the organization.
Yeah.
And then you'll also see a majority of them say they feel like they're ill prepared. And I do feel like there's a strong crossover with creativity that in some ways it's beaten out of us. Jeff Tweedy wrote a book a few years back called How to Write One Song. And he said as kids don't mind like just walking up to a piano and plucking away and seeing what happens. But as an adult, you would be embarrassed if you didn't know how to play. Right. And I think sometimes there's that vulnerability, maybe like a whole like kind of Brene Brown section on that. But I sometimes for this on the front end, I believe we need safe spaces, both and a little bit of courage. So I think this is where overlap with improv and as a fan of the podcast too, and you guys talk to Kelly Leonard, I think there's a strong overlap with improv and productive innovation, especially on the creative front end of it.
Yeah.
Well, Adam, this gets me thinking about if, getting back to Matt's survey results, if companies not only value innovation, but also feel like it's an area that they need help in, what are they getting wrong? What's the problem that they're not, if this is naturally part of who we are, and we've got some cultural restraints, why are we not bringing it forward at work in a better way? Like in some ways, why both of your organizations exist?
Yeah, absolutely. I'll just quickly say the only quibble I have with the quote about culture eating strategy for lunch is that lunch is only one of 3 daily meals. And it's just culture just eats
it eats everything,
all the meals.
Culture eats,
it's a hobbit that has second breakfast.
And so despite even our own experience, we start to see what's going on. And we start bit by bit. It really is death by 1,000 cuts, where you ask a class of kindergartners how many think they're creative. Of course, every hand goes up. Yep. By third grade, you're already starting to peel off about a third of them, and keep going. So that by the time you're in high school, you only think you're creative if you're in one of the obvious creative arts or something, right? And other than that, you think of yourself not as creative. And there are some personal stakes. The moment you say you're creative, then it does kind of raise expectations. But we become so preoccupied with status monitoring that we let the cart, pull the horse, and that's not what we should do. So we should just kind of go back, kind of reconnect. We all have examples from our own. If we would just reflect on it and just make a point of thinking about it, everyone has an example of how in some small way they were creative in the last week. We do it regularly, but usually it's so small that we just go, well, that's just living, and so we don't give ourselves enough credit for it maybe. But it's to reconnect with those moments of creativity that we have demonstrated. Maybe we have to go back a little further to connect with the big obvious ones, but there isn't one of us who can't recognize that capability within him or herself. And so just really, it gets back to recognizing really who we are. I would love to see if we could petition and get our species reclassified, not as Homo sapiens, because that was the Enlightenment, and wisdom and intelligence was, kind of the coin of the realm at that time. I think we are really Homo faber, which means creative, making. Homo faber socialis. We're the creative social hominid, and I think we need to get back to that. And we need to. It would be helpful not to be coy about that, and give ourselves credit and get after it, because we freaking need it.
So Is the solution to this just re-looking at our lives and saying, "Oh, let's like gratitude. If we can kind of keep identifying those moments of gratitude, we're going to be more likely gratitude. If we find those moments of creativity, of innovation, are we more likely to view ourselves as a creative or an innovative type person? Is that as simple as that? And we're done."
Well, I think one thing, another thing that's true of us is we are pragmatic. And sometimes in order to render unto Caesar and be pragmatic, we over render unto Caesar, and we don't safeguard pockets where we're still exploring, where we're still trying things. And I think that is, yes, be good. You probably need to have a day job until you get to the point where you don't. But while you're doing it, do that. But this exploration, this really acting on who we truly are, that is something that can be render unto Caesar most of the time. But most of the time is important because that implies that there are moments that don't fall under that. And so it's probably kind of fractal, but in one day, can you get 5 minutes of trying cool stuff? Just because it's on the frontier of what you're exploring and you're excited by it and you want to see what you can make happen there. In a month, can you safeguard one full day every month? Maybe that's broken up, but the equivalent of one full day to try stuff and care enough about a certain topic that you get good at it and you see what the frontier of the knowledge is in that area, and you see where there are gaps in that knowledge, and then go for the gap that is most exciting to you at the moment, where you think, man, if we could figure something out there, that would be that'd be super helpful to us, I know, and it'd probably be helpful to a lot more people. So render unto Caesar and still keep some space to reconnect with who you really are.
Tuesday mornings between 8 and 8:07.
That's when you'll be creative.
Yeah.
Well, and honestly, we can kind of joke about it, but if you did that consistently, so consistency matters, and we know from behavioral science, consistency matters so much more than heroic effort. That's kind of there's just kind of this grandiosity bias we have.
Right.
No, consistency. Just be consistent. Just keep doing it. Keep hammering away at it, and then it becomes regular. It becomes normal. It does. I mean, the idea of making some small pocket of time routine seems like an oxymoron, but that's kind of how we operate. And so it's probably not the worst idea to figure out ways to do that. Over the course of a year, can you talk to your boss and just say, hey, you know what? Once every 6 months, I'm going to go away for a day, and I'm just going to do some exploring because I think there's value there. And it's I think that's one way of keeping that flame fanned, and we don't want that flame to extinguish.
And Kurt, I'll jump in. You had just when I was looking recently at my new daily shift journal, right? And the notion of a brain break.
Yeah.
I think there's something big here because there's even the notion of, I don't know, even the biology of our brain, where our brain doesn't want to do a lot of deep thinking, right? That burns a lot of energy. And so sometimes we get into routines. Those routines become ruts. Some of those are great. Like we figure something out as a best known practice. But just even in our daily lives, can you take a slightly different route to work? Can you observe something different at home? Just some of these small reflective things. It's amazing what those might spark when you jump out of that pattern. So we're not just sleepwalking through the day. And so I think small breaks or dedicating larger blocks. I think a nod to academics, right? With the notion where you might take a break from something for a while, right? That you might not have to teach this semester because you have deeper research that you're doing, but I think one is allowing that time, kind of that permission component. And then the other is the intentionality. And that's where I think one of the interesting things about innovation, and I think both, not necessarily to speak for Adam, but why we see such a deep connection and why we're so interested in the work that is going on in behavioral science, is what works, what doesn't. But one of the interesting things that I find for good innovation programs, good innovators, is strong left brain, right brain,
Mm.
right? Because a lot of this, the creative front end, where might these ideas come from? But there's a rigor and a discipline to get it done, to get things across a finish line. And sometimes I think, like we might have had a good idea, but we didn't have the guts to see it through. Or there's a question of, do we have any good ideas? And one of the things from Adam's perspective, and we were talking a little bit before just about music, I think innovation could be seen as a craft. It's something you have to practice, right? And that's another thing where I feel like organizations get in trouble is they feel panicked. Now we need a lot of good ideas to get ourselves out of this third quarter sales glitch. Have we practiced on generating ideas at a regular basis? No, and then people are frustrated that they don't have like the magic bullet on demand. But if you allowed for people to practice generating ideas, you'll get a better performance, so to speak.
So, innovation as a mindset and a practice, something we have to get ourselves psyched up for or tuned into to create these habits, to create these routines around it,
Lots of stuff to do, right? And at the same time, innovation is 100% native to who we are. It's part of our genetic code to innovate, to build, to be creative. And yet the image of being creative or being innovative somehow gets drowned out of us at a very early age, right? Like, even though we don't actually stop being creative.
Of course, you got the genetic code in there, Tim. I know you did.
I have to. I
Yeah,
have to play,
no.
have to play the
So,
genetic code.
But I think those are really great stories. So I have early on in my career, I got to see Gordon McKenzie, who was the chief creative guru at Hallmark, and had done a lot of really great creative work, but also ended up writing this great book called Orbiting the Giant Hairball. If you haven't gotten the book or never heard of it, you should get it. Short, small little book. He subsequently passed away, but he was a fantastic presenter and various different things. And one of the things that he talked about in his presentation, I saw him multiple times, is this idea that, he used to go as chief creative officer, would get invited to go into schools and he'd get to talk to kids about all of the creative process and various different things. And he always would do this thing. So he'd go into a room full of kindergartners or even first graders, and he'd ask, how many people in here are artists? And all the hands in the room would go up. Almost every single one would go up. Then he'd go to the third or fourth graders, ask the same thing, and not everybody's arm went up anymore, right? There was only, maybe half or so. And then by the time he got in fifth or sixth grade and he asked that same question, he said there were just a few kind of hesitant hands that would go up when he asked that question of, are you an artist? And I think it's really interesting as you talk about that it's part of this genetic code, part of what we were talking about, but that there is societal kind of expectations that, wow, no, we need to be more serious than that this artist thing is whimsical or whatever it would be, whatever it is that gets beat out of us. And that I think is a really interesting piece.
It just reminds me of how every time you know that my son is a circus performer, Kurt. You know that. A lot of people who are regular listeners might know that. But there's always that question like, well, okay, so what's his backup plan? Like, what happens? It's like, well, this is his life and this is his career and this is what he chose. So he's kind of in the innovation business all the time. But I think it is an inspiration to think, well, what about the rest of us? What about people who are not in that? In a particularly creative mode, we have to be creative too. Businesses don't exist on just continuing to do the same old thing the same old way. Innovation is required all the time, right?
Yeah, regardless, I mean, as you're thinking about what any type of job is, whether it's an accountant, you don't want to be too creative, I guess, if you're an accountant, but within the boundaries of the rules of the law and everything else. But I mean, all of the work that we do, whether it's UX design, whether it's HR, whether it's sales, there's an aspect that we can improve, that we can make things better by being
Yeah.
creative. And so I think it's really interesting, right? This idea of, you know, when, because we are all naturally creative, that's
Hmm.
the premise that we're going on, right? You know, he talks, Adam, I think, mentioned this. He said, it's hard to be on the frontier of where you're exploring and unless you adopt an explorer's mindset, right?
Yeah,
You
yeah,
have,
yeah, yeah.
you have to be curious. You have to
Yeah.
be thoughtful. You have to be careful. Don't rush, right? All of those things.
Yeah, which is what explorers do, right? And yet we often don't frame our getting up and going to work as being I'm on the frontier of my exploration today. you
No,
know?
sometimes I mean it feels oftentimes like we just slog through it. And I think there's
Yeah,
the interesting thing, and we didn't talk about this, but just the motivation, right?
yeah,
If I am feeling like I'm on the front line of bringing new innovative ways of doing things, not just new products, but the way that we work with each other, the way that we do this process, the way that we do whatever it is within the business, that feels more motivating. That feels, to a certain degree, that gives me that little p purpose of getting up and being excited to go to work, and engages me
yeah.
more in that work than slogging through. I got these 10 more, whatever it is that I need to do,
Right.
Excel spreadsheets or 10 sales calls or
You
these
name it.
reports that I need to pump out. So
Yeah. Just to kind of continue with this idea of being the explorer, like there is something about thinking about your job as an explorer, or at least paying attention to it, because you're in the best position to actually come up with ideas as to what could make that job better, or what could make it more useful or purposeful, or
yes,
contribute more to the organization, because you're kind of expert in what you're doing.
you know your job as good or as better than everybody else, unless other
Right.
people are doing that job, right? But you're the one who can understand where you can improve, where you can be creative, all of those factors. So
Exactly. So with that unique perspective, I think it's kind of our responsibility to actually be explorers, be innovators in our own work, in our own jobs, to allow ourselves to figure out what could be better, what could be improved, what could be streamlined, what could be expanded on to make this job, to make this work more fulfilling and more rewarding, and contribute more to the organization as well.
all right, so let's move on to the next section,
Okay.
and we're going to hear where the conversation went as it relates to corporate innovation.
I think there's a couple different ways. Even the way we were talking about how in academia it might be big, broad, long sabbatical, or just a daily brain break. Right? There can be
Mhm.
small and large things. I think sometimes large innovation events, right, like a corporate hackathon, a pitch, or like a Shark Tank, where people get together, present ideas, and the whole organization can see it. And because in the background, it's a nod from leadership that we can take time out of the regular routine to do this. So those are big elements. But I think there's smaller things too. Like there might be managerial practices, right? Like when you think about especially power dynamics, right, between a leader and direct reports. Can a leader sit back in a meeting, let a conversation go for a while before they give their idea? That's one of the things I've found to be really effective too, more on the front end of ideas. But usually, if a leader says, "This is what I think," there's not a whole lot of people that want to disagree at that point. But if you give space for an idea and try to check the power dynamic a bit, those are just a couple small things. I know Adam has a lot too, so I don't want to
Yeah. Well,
ramble.
Matt, you bring up such a good point. I would say, I think I'm seeing this, but I'm obviously confirmation bias. I'm not immune to that either, because I'm human. But there seems to be slowly this understanding that leadership really does need to be emotionally intelligent. And so the smart leader will not lead the meeting off with his or her take on things.
Mm.
And they'll go, hey, we're here to explore and to see. And this pressure to get the answer prematurely, like way too early, really, it hurts the performance. And so dedicate enough time to explore options and come up with options that are good, not just kind of, and we know how, also we know the overly politically astute will come up with other options just so it's clear which, the great option is the one,
Yeah.
And that in some ways that shows, I think, a little bit of contempt for the people you're presenting to, because they can see through it. But be aware of where you are, what are the needs, and when there are super pressing needs, it's great that we can kind of fall back on this kind of retinue of cognitive biases that are built really well for times of emergency and everything. They just kind of impel you into action. You can get going. But mostly, watch out for negativity bias. Don't let concerns subvert good exploration. And also, like, just make it clear that people want to feel safe on both the upside and the downside of that. They want to feel safe on the upside that we're actually going to get something done here. In order to get something really good done that we can all have heart for and we feel better about and we feel more pride in, taking a little more time up front actually pays dividends on a timeline. You actually can get to that deliverable often better, faster, when you first do the exploration up front. And if for no other reason than you get past the nagging doubt about, did we go far enough?
Yeah.
Make sure that you explore so you can feel pretty good about, we went pretty far. There may be some other things that we can do, but we can always kind of note them and come back to them later. But to kind of be true to a deadline, to be efficient in everything, a little more breathing room up front more than pays off. It's one of the best investments you can make with your time and effort.
Yeah, Adam, one of the things I'll add to that with time and investment, a quote that I often bring up it's attributed to Einstein, right? But if he had an hour to solve a problem, right, he would spend the first 55 minutes thinking about the problem and the last 5 minutes thinking about the solution. Because I think there's so much in the power of the question, the framing of the question.
Absolutely.
And that's where we've seen, I think, some really strong contributions from design thinking discipline is almost the how might we, or like a double diamond of understand the problem, divergent thinking, converge and agree on, okay, this is the appropriate problem scope, and then diverge on the solution, then converge on the answer. But I think that's part of it is, what question are we here to solve? And I think sometimes in the pressure of performance in an organization, not to look bad or dumb, I think sometimes we don't ask obvious questions to clarify what is it that we're really trying to solve, or what might the constraints be. And a side note is that actually constraints become super helpful in creativity.
Well, I'm wondering to what degree leadership is being held accountable for things other than really good long-term results. I mean, because Adam and Matt, it sounds like what you're talking about is the whole go faster alone, go farther together kind of thing, right? That leadership, it doesn't have the EQ. They're not being rewarded or held accountable for having good EQ as leaders and really figuring out how to get long-term results. They're just in some ways it feels like the accountability is all about short-term, and then everything's a knee-jerk reaction.
Usually quarters, right? Like,
Yeah.
So how do we really explore deep spaces, breakthrough innovations when leadership and their budgets are tied to quarterly performance?
Monthly sometimes
becomes a
in
challenge.
sales, weekly in
Right.
sales, and
Yeah.
other areas where you're
Yeah.
looking at different pieces. But yeah, I think that's really true.
So in all this talk about responsibility, I I'll try not to be a broken record on this. To use a metaphor that quit being useful about 50 years ago. Uh, but
Those are the best kind.
My
exactly.
kids would never understand that reference.
Just imagine, among all the responsibilities we have, we're so quick to blow past the responsibility that we have as individual career managers. And we're each going to spend 60 to 80,000 hours in our career. And yes, render unto Caesar. Hopefully that's within a context of you working on something that matters to you, that where you find some deep meaning and where you're excited to be part of it. You're going to be a better employee if that's true. You will be more productive if that's true, because you're not watching the clock. I mean, it's just, look, I get it. I feel very fortunate that I've been in the situations I've been. Even when I was working for the man on the client side, I still saw myself first and foremost as CEO of Adam Hansen Incorporated. And by day, I was innovation director at Mars.
That's not Mars the planet. That's Mars the candy and pet food company.
And that was innovation director at Mars was the subset of the bigger thing. And so for right now, how Adam Hansen Inc. is growing and innovating and becoming more valuable is by focusing on this. But even then, I wouldn't I knew that, I knew at some point I would move on from that and I'd go do something else. It's always having kind of that some healthy sense of agency. It's life is about these great dualities, agency and communion. Yes. But I'm a better community member if I actually have worked on my own thing sufficiently. I'm more valuable. I'm more worthwhile. I can make better contributions when I'm still doing enough of my own thing, and that it's clear to me that there's some vision there that's behind everything that I'm doing.
Adam, I think one of the things is I almost go back. It's really abstract, but like kind of a basic premise from Immanuel Kant, right? Was maximum individuality within maximum community.
Absolutely.
Right? And I know those differ, right, from culture to culture, organization to organization. But right, where can you contribute and deliver your best gifts in a way that's rewarding to you, in a manner that supports your community? And again, I know that's a little absurd, and it's hard to apply that right away. But that's where I think sometimes the mindset component comes in: is what can I do for myself, right? Also, so you don't burn out, feel terrible about what you're doing. Are you just punching the clock? But then also that we are part of a community, and I think there are broader issues. We could go down a deep side road on like why community doesn't feel like it might have, or a romanticized version of it. But I think there are ways that you are still part of a community with coworkers, with your family, right, with your geographic community. So how do you maximize those?
Well, and ideally in the community, like I think many of us aspire to be in a community of masters. Like I don't want to just be. I'd love to be in a community of people who are individually cranking, who are individually creating, and there's like a real ferment and a real froth that is very exciting, from which you can draw strength and to which you can contribute your own resources and really help others as well. I want to just kind of touch back on this notion of what is innovation. I will say that I've been doing this for 35 years now altogether, and in that time, innovation in some ways has become such a fuzz word. I often will have clients say, hey, I'm thinking of making a change. I'm thinking of maybe hanging up my own shingle and everything. And I'll go, that's great. What I want you to do is try to find the smallest facet of innovation overall that really gets you going. What is it? What piece of that? Because innovation involves a whole lot, right? So which facet of innovation do you see? It's kind of back to when you understand an area well enough, you can see where the gaps are, and you can go for the gap that is most meaningful to you. And so don't just hang your shingle out as an innovation consultant or whatever. like what we did with behavioral innovation. So it's behavioral science plus innovation, behavioral innovation. So to us, it became this notion that we love innovation so much that the thought of anyone having a harder time at doing it than they really needed to because of these non-conscious biases just seems such a it just seemed like such a waste. And it seemed
Yeah.
so, for us, it's been how do we liberate people to be able to do their best innovation work? How do we liberate people to have that great experience within innovation that all of us in our company have had? And that's, I mean, we're all, many of us are big company exiles. How do you say it? You're like we voted with our feet,
Yeah.
but we still
Right.
want to help out. We still want to help big companies. And so really just getting charged up about the small sliver of it that you have some sense that if you could crack it, there'd be some real value and you'd have a blast pulling it together. That's
I-
fun.
So if I am a leader within an organization, if I am thinking about this as, all right, I know we need to be innovative. I know that in the long run, I am one of those who understands I don't have to just answer to my quarterly results, that I have to be looking further down the road. How do I set that up? What is it that I can do? How can I create this craft mentality within the organization? And is that something that we can just do? I know we talked about brain breaks and different things on
Yeah.
individual levels, but what can we do from an organizational level?
I think at an organizational level, and it's a fantastic question, and I hope I do it justice here, Kurt. But one of the things that I see is some problems when we're talking about innovating within the enterprise, right?
Yeah.
And I do think that's completely different than startups, right? Startups are almost innovative on their own, and they usually don't use the term innovation, but they're attacking a problem in a different way. But in large organizations where they're trying to be intentional about innovation, I think one is the leadership needs to fund it, and they need to fund it in a way that doesn't feel like cuts from the other business units, because the other business units get a little salty when they feel like they're paying an innovation tax. So that's one thing. Can the CEO fund stuff, right? That it's not, hey, innovation is important. So I'm appointing Tim and Kurt. They're going to run our innovation organization. Adam and Matt, your budget is going to be cut by 15% next year to pay for it.
So we are seeing this very important theme come up here, that innovation is natural and corporations need it,
Mm-hmm.
but it's difficult for them to justify what they perceive as an expense to make innovation work.
And I think perception's the key here, right?
Yes.
Because every firm needs to innovate. New ideas are important. Um, everybody needs to be doing what they need to be doing, but unless we have new ideas, then things can go south. So Kurt, what are some of the ways that from what we just heard in this conversation, what are some of the ways that you think innovation could be tackled?
Yeah. So again, corporations thinking about this, it's like, oh, we need to have all of this different things. No, you can do some simple things. So, what some of the things I think the ideas that came up, right? Corporate hackathon.
Yeah.
Have a day,
Yeah.
or even an afternoon. You can do a hackathon, and
That's
people
right.
do this in software coding all of the time. Why not have an HR hackathon? Why not have a sales hackathon?
Yes.
Do all of those, right?
Yes. Yeah.
You could do a Shark Tank type thing. I did this with a company. We
Oh.
actually went in. We did this with a pharmaceutical company. We worked with the teams on developing out their ideas, on the presentation that they put forward. And we actually had a corporate executive come in, and they had a budget, and they were going to fund the best idea from the corporate, Shark Tank. It was
Cool.
fantastic, and people got
Cool.
into it, had really great ideas. And actually they funded the one idea that won, but they also were going to work on at least the second one that came in like a close second. And so I know that was again just that uniqueness of that. Tim, what
I
about
lo-
you? What
I,
are some things that you thought?
Well, just on a much lower level, just the brain break idea that Matt brought up, like the idea of a brain break, just like you can be innovative yourself, right? We've been through this. So if you just take the brain break and let your subconscious get out there and do some of the work while you're focused on something else, can be really, really important. Give
All
yourself
right,
that time. Oh,
I'm going to just make a plug
oh
for
yeah, yes,
our daily shift planner and the brain shift journal. Actually, the daily shift journals
yes,
both have areas for people to actually plan out those brain breaks. So it's not just taking them willy nilly, it is being purposeful about, oh, I need to take a brain break in the morning. I need to take one in the afternoon. Is it going to be a walk today? Is it going to be, going out and, interacting with maybe, somebody else or different pieces, or taking a little breather by reading or watching some cartoons, whatever it would be, but being very purposeful about those. And we have tools that will help you put that in place. So
excellent promo piece there. The
thank you.
other thing that I was thinking of is that there are longer term ways of doing this. Of course, hackathons and Shark Tanks are kind of a half day, afternoon, maybe a full day. Brain break you can do anytime. But if you really need a serious disruption, retreat or sabbatical is a great way to think about. I'm going to take a long weekend or a week or a sabbatical of several weeks and really get my head out of the day to day and get it into a completely creative process to focus on what could be done differently. How can I innovate in my own life? If, as you go back to Adam saying, I'm the CEO of my own life, this might be about your personal life or your career. But
Yeah.
sabbaticals and retreats are great too.
Yeah. And corporations, I think more and more should be being creative about those types of breaks and various different things
Yeah.
where it's not vacation time per se, and
Right.
you're not
Right.
necessarily having to work either, because we understand if we truly do value innovation and creativity, then those are the types of things that need to happen in order to make that come true. So,
Yeah. Agree.
all right,
What about some
what else?
tactics? Yeah, what about some tactics?
Tactics.
Yeah, what about some specific things like one of the things that I thought that was really interesting was this idea of not being put off by disruption or attempts to sort of dissuade us from being innovative. Like like figure out how to kind of rebuff these requests of like, no, we don't need to be innovative. We just need to keep doing our job. It's like, you know what? We're always going to need innovation. We're always going to need a new idea and a fresh idea. And we need to lower our defensiveness to take those new ideas in order to improve the business and improve ourselves as well.
Yeah. I think there's the aspect of having that, if you're on a team or a manager of a team, make sure that you are building a psychologically safe environment. This environment
Yeah.
where I feel like I can show up and be myself, and that my ideas will contribute, and that I won't be socially shunned or dismissed or ridiculed for taking a chance or doing something a little different, or being creative and saying,
Yeah.
let's explore how we do this process. And there's lots of great things that you can Google psychological safety. We've had some
Great
podcasts,
guest.
some grooving sessions on it as well. There's tools that you can go out there and do. Leading Human, our whole, the workbook that we created, has a whole section on psychological safety and
Yeah.
very specific tips and
Yeah.
hints and practices and activities that you can do in order to help build a more psychologically safe environment for your team.
Well, and thinking about these tips, Kurt, I want to get back to promoting brain shift because I think one of the things that I think BrainShift does a really nice job is helping us focus on problems or thinking about reflecting on issues rather than on solutions. When Matt talked about like Einstein spending 55 minutes on thinking about the problem and 5 minutes on solving it, like sometimes what our brain needs is just thinking about the problem. It's reflecting on the issues that are related to the problem and not so much the solutions, right?
And I love that idea because if we start getting into the solution too soon, we can miss opportunities to
Yeah.
understand the problem that might make that solution a lot easier. And I think if we think about this again from motivation, we often run into this, and so we
Yep.
get these requests from executives like we just need to put an incentive, a 90-day spiff or a contest in place in order to drive the motivation. And it's like they've already come up with almost the solution when let's take a step back and look at the problem. What is the problem that your sales force or your employees are having? Why do they have the lack of motivation? Why do
Right.
they have or they're not doing what they want to do?
Right.
And sometimes it might be because there isn't this little extrinsic reward that's out there. Many
So,
times that's not the case, right? Many
yeah.
times it has a multitude of others. And if you don't understand and spend the time just looking at every angle of that, you're going to be kind of maybe pigeonholed into the wrong solution, or even a solution that it maybe doesn't work or could even be counterproductive.
I'm as you're talking about that, Kurt, it reminds me of a project that was designed many years ago for General Motors while they were trying to get more cars sold in Saudi Arabia, and so they wanted to have a reward, an incentive for their for the dealerships, for the
Yeah.
dealer owners, right? And these are all men who are extremely wealthy. They're sheiks, they have private jets. And I'm not talking
Yeah.
about little Learjets and Gulfstreams. I'm talking about like 727s. These are really wealthy people. So a bit more money. If General Motors had come to us and just said, well, what we need is just figure out how to pay them enough money, and
A
it's a
big
financial.
prize, a big dollar amount at the end.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and of course that's not the design. Ended up yielding something that was innovative and something kind of clever, where it was lunch with Nelson Mandela. Obviously, he was still alive, so this is several years ago, right? But it was lunch with Nelson Mandela, and then it was tipped off by this idea that the top 10 dealers were the only ones that could go and have lunch with Nelson in South Africa, and they had to land their planes on the tarmac in the order that they finished the program. So there was this competitive thing, and it cost almost nothing. It cost a small donation to Nelson Mandela's foundation to make it happen. But the competition, the challenge was all about competing for ego and all kinds of things like that. That didn't cost the company a lot of dough. So
And what brought that on was you were looking at the problem longer.
yeah,
You
yeah,
were exploring what is the problem. It's how to get these people who already have a lot of money motivated
yeah.
and to do it in a way that is going to, all right, what are the factors that are going to drive that? And so you're exploring the problem and spending, as you said, the Einstein quote I love, right? Or
Yeah.
what's the sharpening your saw before cutting down the tree, right? I mean, it's all of those little
Yeah.
new, I don't even know what you call them, but
The little things, yes.
yeah.
Okay, well, let's keep exploring this idea of how companies can incorporate innovation into their organizations. And let's start with Kurt asking a question that we've often asked about the role of behavioral science in organizations.
Hey, this is Kurt, and we want to say thanks for listening to Behavioral Grooves. And we hope that you're enjoying this episode, but it feels a little bit one-sided. You're hearing from us, but we're not hearing from you.
This is Tim, and we have two suggestions to remedy that. The first is join our Facebook page and engage with us.
We want to talk with you. We want to hear your perspectives, and hopefully our Facebook page might be the place to have some of that interaction. So please, please come and join us.
The other recommendation we have for you is to leave us a quick rating. You know, the little 5-star thing at the bottom of your app? Or a short review. Just leave us a few words about what you like about behavioral groups. We'd very much appreciate it.
Thanks, and we now return you to our regularly scheduled programming.
Do organizations bring in and have a behavioral science department or a person or a group, or is behavioral science embedded into HR, into marketing, into engineering? How is it with innovation? Is it a both and? Is it a either or? Where do you think?
Both and either or. Different companies try different models. Sometimes it's like a shared service or it's its own unit, and then maybe you can seek help from the innovation team on challenges that you might have. Or you might work, and other one is where it is embedded across units, right? That you work on having more innovative practices and things that you can do in each organization. I think the ideal is that, it's across organization. It's not its own business unit. It also is a lot more vulnerable from a CFO finance perspective. Like when you look at an org chart, right? What's this outlier there? But if you truly want innovation, it should be embedded across the organization. But getting started with that, sometimes you need an organizational unit that is dedicated to it, can help teams. A lot of times that is also, I think Greg Sattel in Cascade said it's easier to sell a win than it is an idea. So, like, how do you build a portfolio of here's what the innovation practice or team did for us, and the notion of practice too. And that's if you're not used to generating new ideas, exploring ideas, or kind of a concept that we don't talk about, but back to the definition, I do see innovation as de-risking your future because you're running experiments, you're trying to explore, you're getting more sensors out into the world, right, to gather more information. At Brightidea, one of the things we talk about is we have a graph that shows a mass corporate extinction event, right? When we think about how long companies were on the Fortune 500, right, or who's in the Dow Jones, and right now like Google and Amazon are over 30 years old, right? They're ripe for kind of disruption as well. But the cycles move faster and faster. How do we react to that? Part of it is get started, but have leadership that can support it, provide some air cover. And one of the things that I've found with leaders, working with leaders in corporations, most of them want to support innovation. And honestly, they don't know how. So innovators can also do a little bit of healthy coaching upwards. Like here's what I need for you to help support this program. So sorry, there was a lot in there in different directions, but the short kind of consultant answer is, back to the structure, it depends. But if it's going to be long lasting, it can't be just off to the side, right? Because we have a tough year, or shareholders are telling us, right, we need more revenue. Innovation department seems to be easy to cut.
Both you and Matt are in consultancies where you have your own processes, but what can people do within their own corporate settings to enhance their innovative processes? Adam, can you give us a go at that?
Yeah, well, absolutely. So we, I would say, just because we've put a lot of thought into this, be aware of those non-conscious things that are tripping you up. We have, as Dan Ariely speaks about in Predictably Irrational, we've identified the 8 cognitive biases that cause most of the mayhem in innovation, particularly in the earlier parts of innovation, but going on through concept development, then into product development. And the wonderful news that we found is that these cognitive biases, once people hear them, they go, "Oh, that's what that is. I'd wondered. Yes, I've seen that multiple times." So we didn't speak about a cognitive bias that wasn't a consistently aggravating one. But just to be aware of it, the great news then is that you can do something about it. And most of the fixes are straightforward. It takes just really adjusting your mindset, getting to the point where you can spot these biases getting in the way. And what the biases are they're subroutines that evolved through, over time to answer the needs of very different conditions than those under which we operate now, particularly if we're trying to do innovation.
Can you give us an example?
Negativity bias. So bad is stronger than good, as Roy Baumeister so wonderfully said. So bad events, bad memories, bad people all hold far more sway in our memories and just in effect on us than they probably should. We get it, but we find them threatening. This bias evolved because it really kept our ancestors alive when life was lived on a kind of where the big win every day was just to survive, to make it to another day. Then it was great that you saw all novelty as threat and not necessarily as opportunity. But enough of our ancestors saw novelty as opportunity so they could figure out ways to bring it in and go, oh, okay, this isn't so bad. This isn't as threatening as it might have first seemed. But more and more daily existential threat is not a concern for most of us. So we can say, thank you, negativity bias. You've served us well. You've helped bring us to where we are now. But we know we can always draw on you if there's an emergency. Fantastic. And then, we'll decide really quickly and we're impelled into action. But letting that, it's a really weird piece of that is all the cognitive biases are automatic. And yet, particularly with negativity bias, negativity appears profound. And so we've all been in meetings where we know people who can shoot any idea down really well, and they're usually pretty articulate, and they usually have some force, and it seems so adult, and it seems so businesslike and responsible and everything. And we can revert to what our 30-second great ancestors, great grandparents would have done to say, oh, tribal leader, thank you so much for keeping us from doing something so foolish as to try this new thing. What were we thinking? What were we thinking? It's a bad Seinfeld bit. But so just recognizing that, and then the response to that, the counter to it, is to go, okay, let me think about what that negative stimulus was. What is good about it? And even in the dumbest idea in the world, we take clients through this in practice all the time. We'll deliberately come up with a bad idea within a given context and say, great, what are you for in it? What's good about it? What value can you extract out of it? We're really great. We're all MacGyver at some point, right? We can all find some value in anything that we're presented with, at least if for nothing else, in the sense that it gets us to consider something else, maybe kind of like it in one particular area where we can find some value in which we can then get really mercenary, and do something with it.
Yeah.
So that's
Yeah. For our younger listeners, MacGyver was a old TV show where MacGyver was a guy who could solve anything with gum and a toothpick and a pocket knife. Yeah,
even the parody of it is now kind of long in the tooth. MacGruber.
Yeah, just check it out. I think it was in the 80s or somewhere in that area. But all right, so the process for you. So Matt, from your perspective, adding on to what Adam has said here, what would you think about from that process perspective around innovation?
Yeah, I think process is a great word, because sometimes when you're uncertain, a process can see you through. Right? Mm-hmm. And so like a good innovation process for me is one that has graduating rigor. Like we talked about the creative and the discipline of innovation. And you don't want to crush every idea right away.
Yeah.
Right. And yet before you make you do want to test and experiment so you don't make a big, expensive mistake, right? You're trying to learn all the time, kind of the fail fast, so that we can learn quickly. And one example to bring it to life is that when I was teaching an innovation class, I would share a picture of Simone Biles as a toddler. And I would ask if anybody knew who this was. Nobody did. Then the next slide, I show Simone Biles with all of her gold medals. Right? And this is the same person. And I think ideas are very similar in an organization. If we didn't help toddlers walk, if we didn't help feed them, we would have no Olympic athletes. But also, we can't expect Olympic-like world-class performance from the very get-go of an idea. And I think that's one of the tensions and challenges we have in organizations as well, is what are our shared expectations for an idea, for an insight over a period of time. And so using a process of, where is it we're, crowdsourcing ideas, we're generating on the front end. We're using good practices, almost like improv. Like, how might we build on this? To Adam's point, there's a strong correlation between yes and forness, right? You're not saying no to something, but eventually you do have to make business decisions. You're going to have to say no. And so as an idea advances, at a certain point, you might need to say, here's the evidence we need to see. And just thinking back to a recent interview both of you had, right, with Steve Martin, I mean, it really resonates with evidence, economics, emotion, or facts, finance, feelings, is what part of our brain do we need to engage right now for this? And that's where you can have structured decision-making in a healthy way. And again, not jumping to a solution right away and making an expensive mistake, but also not crushing all of your ideas early, because there are the Simone Biles, there are the Michael Phelps of the world that couldn't walk, couldn't swim.
Yeah, but to that point, right? I mean, as children, you take that class picture of all the kids in kindergarten. Of those kids, not all of them are going to go on to be gold medal Olympics,
or
champions.
gold medal Olympics.
That's
or even being able to talk in a coherent
Right.
sentence and have a podcast. That would be a masterful thing that they could do. But so what I'm hearing you say, though, is that there is this, don't just dismiss, like, nobody in here can ever be achieve these great things, and so we're going to dismiss all of you because maybe 99% of you aren't. But there are those ideas that can get there, and there may be, again, gymnasts who don't get to a gold medal, but man, they're on their high school gymnastics team. They might even go into collegiate gymnastics, and those, and bad analogy here, but those ideas for an organization are the ones that, granted, the gold medal are the ones that blow us out of the water and take us to the next level. But those other ideas, the ones that, hey, we're in a club, gymnastics sport, wow, those are the ones that pay the bills on a day in and day out basis, right? That we continue to see that innovation happening. It might not be ground shaking, world renowned kind of things, but it is those that keep going. Is that a bad analogy that I'm making?
No, I think that's good. And I was thinking about what you said too, and it overlaps with the definition of innovation, and as an organization collectively, what is innovation, right? So, what are we looking for? And sometimes I think some people might think innovation has to be technology, right? It has to be shiny new. If it's not AI, or it doesn't have us living on Mars, it's not innovation. Where sometimes small tweaks to a sales process, and we take this for granted now, but it wasn't that long ago, right? Where through internet service, like, the evolution from even just brick and mortar to e-commerce to a blended experience, but the idea of subscription models for different services, right? That was a complete change to a pricing model, but it didn't require carbon fiber. It didn't require titanium. It didn't require, the latest computer chip. So there are also different ways we can innovate within these spaces. So as you were like, that's where I'm thinking when you were talking about the class of kindergartners, right?
Yeah.
And if we're going to project 20, 30 years in the future, which one might have gold medals, which one might be a political leader, which one just was, middleman, which was the great person that just showed up for work every day and had some insights on what they could change. And so I think sometimes when we're only looking for that bright, shiny new technology, that also limits what we could do to create and capture value.
Two very quick points. This is so good. So I'll do it fast. Joe Henrich, which I'll encourage all of you to read, his book, The Secret of Our Success. It dealt with the topic, why were we the species that kind of broke from the pack? And he was the one who made the point that cultural intelligence is our secret. So social, we're better than any of the other hominids. And he has this great quote that I just love. He says, Newton's, if I see far, it's because I stand on the shoulders of giants. Joe Henrich said, if we see far, it's because we stand on the shoulders of millions of pygmies. Mm-hmm. And it's those small individual improvements, the sum total of which over time really becomes pretty impressive. And maybe it's the very scale of it that makes it easier to adapt or makes it easier to implement or whatever that is. But really recognizing, there's the heroic person theory of history. And yeah, I get it. If someone ever asks, is that the better lens? I just go, well, no, that's just another lens. Take it as far as it goes, but understand there's some shortcomings to it, but we don't have to discount it. The other point I wanted to make was that there is a really interesting test, an innovation inventory called the Curtin, Kirton, Adaptive Innovative. Matt, I don't know if any of you, if you've ever heard of it, but it goes in with, I think, a better question. And it says, the question it answers is not how creative are you, but how are you creative? And Curtin's work showed that, look, they're really broadly, they're kind of two big areas of innovation and then kind of a bridging function in the middle. One is very innovative, kind of wow out there, these are the people that if they're not socialized appropriately are either institutionalized or imprisoned. And, and then you have the adapters. And these are the people who say, oh, okay, this is what we're dealing with. Let's make that work. Another really old metaphor or example here is Radar O'Reilly from MASH. No. You could just he get on the horn and he could just make connections. He can make stuff happen. And everyone's go, whoa. But he wasn't this obviously showy, kind of flamboyant, creative guy, So innovative, adaptive. And then those people in the middle who are usually the organizational glue, the bridgers, who are comfortable enough doing the crazy, innovative stuff, but also understand why you just need to, why the trains need to run on time and why you need to make some smaller creative choices to make sure that those trains do keep running on time. And so the fact is, we need all of that. And I have yet to meet the person that can fit somewhere, in those three types. And it just gets back to this misnomer that creativity is only the most showy, performative stuff.
So it wasn't necessarily a bad thing that Steve Wozniak's dad said, hey, Steve, you should really think about middle management. Just stay in your lane.
Where would we be without it? Yeah. And I would say, if that's really you, so get some self-awareness and some self-discovery, and then become the biggest badass middle manager that you can, and just really excel at that. And within that purview, innovate. Like you're still, because you are you, right. You still should have some vision for what excellence looks like there. And don't be shy about making that happen. And just love it, Yeah. I think love isn't spoken about enough. It seems too squishy. It seems, it freaks out the finance department the moment you start talking about love. But what do you love enough to get going on? What do you love enough to suck at it for a while in the service of getting better at it? And that's any talent any of us has is because we are more than willing to suck at it for a while.
Yeah, absolutely.
And we just didn't care what anyone thought.
Well, that's the practice component, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I'm just starting. What are you talking about? Leave me alone.
Tim, to your Wozniak about too, is I have an Australian friend, and he said there's a phrase in Australia, cut the tall poppy.
Yeah.
Right. And it's the one that's standing out or looks different. And so, right, that goes back to I don't, kind of from our behavioral component, sometimes I think like where we evolved and survived, it was a social nature, right?
Yeah.
And what's the worst thing that could happen is to be ejected from a tribe or a community.
Yeah.
Right. And so if you stood out or were different or violated norms, I think the hard part is sometimes which norms might I be violating, or in what service. Sometimes I'm going to choose to do this, right? Like maybe some Arthurian thing is I just actually spoke the truth and everybody was wowed by it. Or I went up to reach and pull the sword from the stone.
Well, and even at the extreme there, Matt, then being banished from that tribe, I will say, and I know I come off as so Pollyanna sometime, but being banished from that tribe is then liberating, because now you can go find the tribe where you fit in better,
Right,
and,
right.
and where you really can, where your contributions are more valued, and where you can be seen as a leader, and where you can be seen as a real resource to the group, and where because of that you personally maybe have more at stake, and
Yeah.
you're just going to do better. And yeah, and it's free association is such a wonderful thing, and rights of free association imply rights of free disassociation.
The tallest poppy thing here is really important. We are social beings and we want to fit in. So we're
going to do some good
do
stuff, right? We're going to have a process that fits with our culture, right?
Well, and we
Right?
don't want to stand out too much. This is, I had an employee once who was from Australia, and I will tell you what really is interesting is we were getting our PhDs together, and we were in a session, a live session. It was an online program, but we got together for these live sessions, and in that session, Ash knew a whole bunch about this part of this
tall
what the
poppy
teacher
thing?
was teaching. Well, what the
Oh.
teacher was talking about, and the teacher called on him, and Ash saw it as being a tall poppy, and he was feeling like he was being singled out. And we had to convey at the end, me and this little cohort of friends saying, no, you are actually being raised on a pedestal, not the poppy that was going to be chopped off.
Right.
You are being held up as an example. And I think that part is a redefining of how we think about this, is instead of thinking like, oh, I'm going to be squashed, I'm going to be cut down, maybe by being innovative, by being the rebel, by, kind of standing out from the crowd, you are going to be the one who's held up in esteem.
I love that. So it's about reframing and changing our expectations, right? That we can do this ourselves, and if we do it enough, if enough of us do it, we can change the impact on the organization. I wanted to spend a minute on some things that we might be able to do when it comes to this whole idea of innovation processes. And you and I have talked about and we talked about it with Adam and Matt.
Matt?
Like, should innovation be a dedicated team, or should it be experts in the field and spread throughout the organization? And I think that there are times, I want to make an argument to say that sometimes a dedicated team can be helpful because they can bring a level of expertise to the story, to what needs to be done within the organization, within the culture of the organization, to actually expand on innovative ideas. So I think that there are times to give some consideration to a dedicated team actually helping out.
Well, and I think there's an expertise about the process of innovation that can be brought by a dedicated team. That, again, if I'm in HR or accounting or UX, I don't need to spend that time researching that and learning that and building an expertise in an innovative thinking
and how to
process.
be innovative, like how to be innovative, right?
So they can have that dedicated team that can help the rest of the organization build those skills because they have that expertise in it. And I think that's really great. I also, Adam brought up this idea of de-risking your future, that innovation is a way of de-risking your future.
Yeah.
And I think one of the big pieces is that, again, framing that with leaders, because too often it's seen as just that expense, and or they want innovation but they don't know how to get there. So you have to help them get there, right?
Right, right.
And as an innovator, you need to show them that this isn't as risky as they think it is.
Yeah, and that negativity bias, that idea that bad is stronger than good, that's going to be out there. That especially for leaders where they're afraid the leaders have the same tall poppy issue that all of us have, right? They're not immune to it.
Yeah.
So I think to some degree they're also worried about that.
Yeah. Adam had a great quote in that previous section. They said, the question it answers is not how creative are you, but how are you creative? I love that quote, right? It's not
How
how
yeah.
creative are you, but how are you creative? And slight just movement of words, but vastly different meanings. And I think
Well,
it's
it gets
really
us
important. Yeah.
and it absolutely gets us back to this idea that Adam brought up at the beginning. That's part of our DNA. This is part of our genetic code. So if we're going to actually be creative within the company, if we're going to be innovative, then we just need to think about how are we being creative? What are the ways that are going to work within our culture, within the corporation? Um,
Yeah.
so I think
Yeah.
that that's
And
really
then
key.
yeah, I think another really interesting piece that we talked about, like, are we expecting that first idea that we have is by far the best idea, right?
Yeah. Well, isn't it? That was the first idea I came up with, so of course it's the best.
Well, what
Is
was James Heyman when we talked? He talked about the idea of statistical odds that your best idea happens to be the very first idea that you come up with. What are if there's 20
yeah,
ideas that you have or could have,
right.
what's the statistical odds that the very first one is by far the best one? You know,
That is something to take to the bank right there. Yeah.
yeah.
But
And the problem is, though, Tim, is human nature. What happens when we think of that very first one? What's the first thing our brain does? We do what?
anchoring. We get
Yeah,
anchored on it. We get locked in, and that becomes the status quo. And then we start measuring everything against it. It's a
yeah.
cascading. It's the comedy of errors at that point.
Yeah, and again, I love doing this with participants in workshops that I do, but we do the fun little thing of handing out this, half of the group gets this thing that says, ask the question, is the Nile longer than, say, 800 miles?
Yeah.
And the other half gets the thing that says, is the Nile longer than 3,000 miles? And then we both ask them at the end, what's your guess of
Hmm.
how long the Nile is? And just that simple little question up, is it 800, is it longer or shorter than 800 miles versus is it longer or shorter than 3,000 miles? And the averages that come in, and I'm going to mess this up and it changes based upon the group, but
Right.
the 800-mile question, always, always, always significantly lower than the 3,000, which is always, always, always much significantly
Right.
higher when they ask about just what is the actual length of the
Just
Nile.
because of that anchor, just because of the anchor.
And that's just what we see first. And so it's
That's
part
right.
of that element of same thing with the ideas that we have. We get anchored in, and that truncates or influences every other idea that we have too.
Yeah. Well, I'm along those lines of exploring lots of ideas and not getting anchored on the first one. I think about the number of workshops that we've done where it's a 2-day workshop, and we tell participants on the first day, we're going to spend the first day is just trying to actually not solve a thing, but exploring the question. Like we're just going to spend all day focusing on what is the right question to ask and how should we be answering that? Not what the solution is. And the eye rolls, you know,
Oh my God.
all
Yeah.
over. But Saul Perlmutter spent 20 years trying to figure out a question about whether or not the universe was expanding or contracting. So, like in some ways, to spend one day on an important business problem just trying to figure out one thing for one day is actually not much time and so useful because you can generate so many interesting ways of thinking about the problem that then it becomes easier to solve when you actually get to the solution phase.
But as humans, we have a desire for closure. We want, it's like if in still just exploring the problem and exploring what's the right question, exploring all of the facets that surround this, we're not getting to closure, and it feels difficult. There's an actual feeling in your gut sometimes about that, and I get it. But that's why you bring in you and me to help out, because we can, alleviate that and just help people through and make sure that the process doesn't rush itself, and you get much better results on the back end of that. Okay, so let's tee up the last section here, and we're going to cover with Adam and Matt some practical tips on enhancing innovation from inside your organization.
Adam and Matt, you guys have been doing this with companies, specifically helping them be more innovative. And you've been doing it from the outside, but thinking that maybe I'm, a middle manager in an organization and I want to innovate. What can we do to help make that innovation come alive in the organization? What can I, as the middle manager, do to start to manifest this? Matt, get us started on that.
Yeah, Tim, I think one of the big things that came to mind first for me was the notion of you get the behavior you incent. Right. So look at what are the incentives, either positive or negative. What are some things that we might do? And Tim and Kurt, I know you're steeped in a background also in rewards, in programs, and the hard part with innovation is like some of the financial components. Those can spike things early, but they're not sustainable, right? But some of the look at the incentive system that you have for people to participate. And again, positive or negative, right? Like I was joking with a colleague a few years back. We're in a meeting and a boss asked, said, okay, open discussion. I want people to speak their mind. Just let's be frank. The first person that spoke up, the boss then lit into that person.
Yeah.
Disagreed with them. Strangely, there were no other people had anything they wanted to bring forward.
But you bring up a really good point there. The incentives are not always the financial ones. They are the social reward, that being recognized for what you're doing, getting the time on the floor to speak. All of those are the little things that as humans we're really good at identifying, maybe not being able to put our finger on and say, oh, this is it. But all of those small social rewards are really valuable as we're thinking about this as well.
And as it overlaps with culture, and I think this goes back a little bit too with what Adam was saying with forness, is you can celebrate things that demonstrated that behavior, right? Yeah. So a lot of times we spend a lot of energy writing policies about things that shouldn't happen, right? Like because one thing happened, so somebody wore open-toed shoes, so then HR had to write these long policies about footwear and what's accepted or not accepted. But as a middle manager, something that you can do quick and easy is, hey, folks, I just want to give Kurt a high five. We were talking about this. He came up with a new reason or a new shift in what we can do in the end of our sales process to improve this. Here's what we saw. Right? Could be things like that. So celebrating the wins and acknowledging the positive things that you see rather than trying to punish negative things is a way, for incentives and disincentives. And other things too are putting, it's almost like there was a lot done on knowledge management in the 90s. Like how do we really capture, curate knowledge, and what does it really mean to be a knowledge organization? And I remember one book, its basic takeaway was like, a lot of this comes from kind of organic conversations. So if you want more of those, put more water coolers in your organization. Right? What's the affordance for the type of behavior you want to see? So can you help start to craft an environment where things are a little different? Those are some small things. I recognize they're still a little bit abstract to implement, but I think a manager could already start to acknowledge positive changes because somebody offered an idea and it was built upon, and we saw a success.
So, Matt, it's really interesting that you bring that up. And sorry, Tim, I know you want to jump in here too. But as you're talking about the water cooler piece, so what struck in my mind is today with the remote work, hybrid work, this call that many organizations are having of bringing everybody back into the office every day, there is value in having people gathered together. But how does one facilitate that without that? But there's also a cost to that, from employee engagement, actually even productivity, all sorts of different elements that go into that piece of it. So are there things that you've seen in this hybrid new world that we've had post-pandemic about being able to create work environments where you can get that cross-pollination, different pieces?
One short, small thing is something like Slack or Teams, where you can actually have channels. It's a little more asynchronous, but have discussions around, like, it's almost like affinity groups or communities of practice, and that sometimes you can make connections with folks, because it is harder when we're not in the same places and we don't bump into each other for conversation. But I think having some of those tools available, and that there can be a little bit of freedom for non-work related Slack channels.
Yeah.
Like our company, we're distributed, and there's like one that's just about TV and film for people that are interested in what new shows are going on. What are you watching? We have another one that's just called Dog Watchers, and it's just people that enjoy dogs, or they can post pictures of what their dog is doing.
Yeah.
Right. And just small things, but it humanizes us and reduces just the two-dimensional kind of screen that we have when we're working remotely. But I'd love to hear what you guys have.
Adam, how about you? What are some thoughts?
Yeah, I just want to acknowledge that we are in what I would call the everyone wants to go to innovation heaven, no one wants to die segment of the program. And so let's figure out cool ways we can die on behalf of innovation. And I would say there are a few things. So just start ideating, start it. Just if find one other, co-conspirator. I use subversive language because I think it's kind of fun. And if you can have a little bit of humor around it and everything, again, yes, be a good corporate citizen. And in order to be a good corporate citizen, have a little tinge of subversion. Hugh MacLeod says everybody needs to have at least one wicked plan. So it's easy in ideation. It's easy to focus on the number of ideas, and that's great. N equals exclamation point to really reduce it. The more ideas, the better ideas you do tend to get. Linus Pauling first set that up. I think the first guy to win Nobel Prizes in completely disparate areas like chemistry and peace. But so number of ideas is important, and we tend to maybe over-focus on that. That's great. What I'm saying is not lose that, but add other metrics. So you get good ideas also when you first get uniquely identified opportunity areas. So when you first do that upfront work to lay out, this goes back to the creative problem solving model. When you lay out the territory and like what's all going on there, what are the big opportunity areas that we might go after? And oh, by the way, because we are who we are and we have a corporate culture that should be distinct somehow, and maybe we have a brand that has a particular perspective that we can tap into. How can we think about those opportunity areas differently than everyone else in the category is? Because if you're thinking about your opportunity areas exactly as everyone else is, then I think you're kind of betraying the opportunity. You're not So number of uniquely defined opportunity areas that aren't just fungible with how everyone else is thinking about. That's a really important one. The breadth and even like maybe time horizon of the opportunity areas that you're considering. Again, this is what you'll do is you'll come up with more opportunity areas it can possibly cover. So you can then, you've diverged, now you're going to converge on the opportunity areas you're going to go after. And you'll use each one of them as its own starting point for ideation. So you give ideation a context. So now we're going to come up with ideas around this. And this is the moment, this is the who, what, when, where, around this. So kind of the breadth of that and really pushing forward a little bit more. And the more you can always be thinking about that, I think the better off you are. You should be thinking about what those kind of those emerging, bubbling under the radar opportunity, the weak signals approach, here to innovation. What might be coming that we should maybe get some thought going on. And then within your ideation, you always want to use stimuli to help you ideate. And you want the really smart blend of related and unrelated stimuli because you're going after uniqueness and relevance. And so the uniqueness will come more from some of the unrelated stimuli. The relevance will be beefed up by some of the more related stimuli that can kind of help you with the specifics of the context and everything. But really just be thinking about that really smart combination of related and unrelated stimuli. And it doesn't have to
Adam,
be,
what do you mean by stimuli? If
So-
I'm a middle manager and I'm sitting here, okay, stimuli, what am I, bringing in magazine articicles from like,
it could be that. It could be that. So let's say let's come up with an example. So I work. My team's working on healthy snacks. So we're
Okay.
in a, it's a crowded market. We got to figure out some different way of doing this. Stimuli could, of course, include lifestyle magazines. It could include what is the ingredients forecast for 2025 that would be interesting to take a look at. It could be, we know our target market. So what are some of the other things they're doing for which healthy snacks are really important? Like they really, because they care about doing some of these other things, outdoor activities, or I'm a great do-it-yourselfer. And when I'm cranking on a Saturday for 10 hours building something, yeah, it'd be nice to have something that kind of keep me going in a healthy way. But kind of getting some of these rich context cues, but then think of the bullseye, think one concentric circle out, two concentric circles out. What are some of those things out there as well that I could bring in? And that what's amazing about our minds is we can smash associate any two disparate ideas. So I should have thought this through, so I had a great example. But if I'm working on healthy snacks, hey, I might think about what I can learn from Febreze air spray. I don't know. Beyond flavor cues, is there anything else around the sense of olfaction that could really lend to a greater healthy snack? As I munch it, it releases volatiles into the air that really kind of help wake me up and kind of keep me going. I'm making this all up now.
Yeah.
But you want stimuli, because the worst thing you can do when you're ideating is to say, hey, this is what we're going after. Ideate. And Doug Hall used to say, don't use your brain as a reference library. Use it as a central processing unit. Use it as a computer, not as its own data bank. Because per some of the cognitive biases, like availability bias, will tend to go to those items that are just most quickly summonable. And those might not be the most helpful. They might have a tinge of negativity to it because of negativity bias, but they might be just kind of more obvious. And so they're easier to draw up. So really stretching it some on the stimuli, but it's just like anything else. If you practice bringing stimuli in to help you ideate, to give you fertilizer and seeds, to get going, you'll get better at it. And pretty quickly, you can come up with a really great list of stimuli in 5 or 6 minutes. If you just sat and kind of go, okay, plenty of related, plenty of unrelated. Yeah, let's see where it goes. And let's see where it goes is, I use that term really intentionally, because that's what it's all about. We did one, just a quick anecdote. We did a massive project on a very popular consumer platform on the internet many years ago that you would recognize. And we ended up generating over 8,000 ideas. And after the project, kind of coding and classifying and doing all of that, the client very sweetly said, "Hey, yeah, this is really great. Hey, next time, is there a way just to help us get to the best ideas?" And we said, yes, of course we can do that. And that's why we individually have islands in the Caribbean already,
Yeah, there you go.
So I was just going to, like, as a middle manager, one of the things, when I was in charge of a design team, one of the things that we did, and I know this is harder in hybrid work, but one of the things that I did was we would take field trips periodically. And that was one of the big things, was to get out and away from our desk, right? So this was also so we would see and experience other things. And to make some things fun, we'd have part of it was scavenger hunt, and then people would gather together, to see. We would pick different topics, and what did they see, and how was this handled in areas that aren't our exact work, right? And so then people would come back and then talk about what they found, like, that met these categories, and then that became a conversation, kind of idea smasher there. And we would happen to reconvene at a low key bar, right? It's not, but a place that people could sit, be relaxed. We're still not at the office, but for my team, it counted as work time, right? But there was a little bit more freedom, and they were able to bring new perspectives. And I saw people solve other problems because they saw a new kind of inspiration just from those conversations. So that's something too, is like schedule. It's not unstructured, but schedule time away from the day to day to give some of those breaks that we mentioned earlier.
You could do that even in a hybrid, in a remote.
Absolutely.
You could have, all right, let's get together. Here we are. We'll go out into your local neighborhood area, and we're going to take pictures of unique textures or something else, and then we come back, and then you can share them in a format like this, or in some other, as you said, Slack or other kind of channel piece. Again, just getting that out of the normal. I know when some of the things that I've seen from that remote work and working different people is, there are those opportunities to just be online without an agenda, and have the kind of that water cooler component of talking in different pieces, or starting meetings out with a check-in on how you're doing and what new cool thing has been happening. So build that in, do those types of things in order to not have it be so business process oriented every moment of the time, that we don't allow our brain to kind of take that brain break, as we've talked about, or even just a visualization component going off somewhere else. So
yeah, earlier we were talking about the individual DNA, this idea of sort of striving for our individual significance, right? And is there a connective tissue to the organization having an understanding and a knowledge and a self-awareness of what the DNA and the culture of the organization is, in order to be really good at innovation? Does an organization sort of need to know what they're about? Do the people who are working there sort of need to have this sort of deep-rooted sense of, this is what the core means to us?
I think some of those things for me, I think, and it goes back to, I think we had mentioned a little bit maybe about storytelling, but also back to brand, right? Where I think about, what was the genesis of the organization? Like, why did it exist? And I think there's some interesting things you can do. Like, how might that be applied today? So part of my career, I worked at ACT, the testing company, and Lindquist, he was a board member for the College Board, thought there was a more humanistic way to do testing, brought it to the College Board. They said no. He created the ACT, right? And one of the things that I know that standardized testing feels cold and remote. one of Lindquist's quotes about testing is, a test done well lets you know if you're ready for the next step.
Mm.
And if you're not, what do you need to do to get there? And, there are times where, you could, when I was at ACT, would invoke that to challenge us. Like, how would that mentality be applied today? Right. It's not about being a test security company. And so then we started to, what does it mean to have personal insights about your career path, about your educational path? Right. And that opens up new things. So I do think, sometimes I'm a big believer in strong brands, right? That they overlap a lot with culture, right?
Mm.
What's in, what's out, what's important, what do we accept, what don't we accept? And I think sometimes through those Genesis stories, or it sounds really weird, but it's State Farm, right? They used to have a book called the Farmer from Myrna, because they're the guy that started State Farm. But the idea was it was a farm mutual insurance company, because they shouldn't have to pay the same rates for those folks driving around in busy Chicago, right, where they're going to crash. When we're on these distant farm roads, it's really hard to get in an accident, right? And then so maybe farmers could come together and insure themselves. And so then the Farmer from Myrna becomes this important story. And what does it mean for that heroic component? And as I say that, I'm reminded that as Adam has really brought out too, we tend to celebrate the individual hero when we know, like, it wasn't just Edison, right? Edison had a team working for him. It wasn't just Frank Lloyd Wright, right? Even if you visit his home studio, there's like 18 desks of people that were designing
Right.
for him, right? So, and Steve Jobs wasn't the only person that worked at Apple. Jeff Bezos wasn't the only person at Amazon. We do have those hero stories, but I think there's a power in what was it about an insight, and that's another organizing principle that I think is worthwhile, and something people can is sometimes I'll say insights over ideas, because then you can what insight do we have about a particular situation? Now let's work to innovate on that, rather than just we're spread all over the place with ideas.
Yeah.
I'm going to build right on that, Matt. This is perfect. And so I think it's two things about should the company give you enough direction as a starting point? And I think the word that comes up when I hear anything like that is, yes, there needs to be enough, but not too much. So you need to have, yes, this is kind of where we're going, and this is, and being able to share stories and everything. We all want to fall in love with the company we work with. I mean, I think we'd really like to, and not to become more, a workaholic, but to really have that bigger connection to mission and everything. The kind of the bigger view that we can get gives us even greater opportunity than to scope it down and get really switched on about this smaller thing that I'm doing now that ladders up to that bigger idea. So enough sense of direction, but not too much. I think the notion of inciting events, and I'll give you a quick example. These leading to some fresh, penetrating insights. Dove Beauty, back in the day, the Unilever folks, they were really getting freaked out about how beauty was defined in America, and we got the chance to work with them right as this was all happening, and to hear them talk about, wow. So here's the very quick story. So the team at Dove, working particularly on products for teenage girls and kind of on up to young women, they were getting freaked out about the American definition of beauty. And they said, look, let's just be honest here. And managers being able to call stuff out, to name what the issue is in an evocative way is really helpful. And they said the idea of female beauty in America is an anorexic 14-year-old girl.
Mm-hmm.
And everyone just went, oh, yeah, that's horrible. And have we been inadvertently contributing to that? Like, are we kind of on the hook, for helping to address this? And so they, unbeknownst to upper management, the team there working on this arranged with the admins of upper management to interview their young daughters about self-perception, about their concerns about beauty and everything. And you had 9-year-olds who were crying because they felt that already like they were too fat. There were 12-year-olds that for whatever reason just knew they didn't fit in because of their appearance and everything. And so they videotaped all of these and they edited it really well. And they called a meeting and they said, management, we have something we'd like you to see. And so they dim the lights, they play the video. And right now, this is either going to really connect or several people are going to be fired, right?
Yeah.
All of them will be fired.
Yeah, all of them. And it fortunately it worked. And there was not a dry eye in the room. And everyone came out of that saying, yes, we have to do the right thing. And that's where the Dove campaign for real beauty came out. And they said, okay, here are the rules. There's not going to be photo retouching. We're going to show women of all shapes and sizes, all ethnicities, across a wide age range. We're going to move past this ridiculous, idealized, and really damaging definition of what female beauty is. And this is where we're going. And so having the intuition that there was an opportunity there to do the right thing and to do it in such a powerful way. And then to have something at stake, as an innovation manager, yes, choose your battles, but have some damn battles every now and again, you shouldn't be doing it all the time because then you'll just become an organizational malcontent and nobody's going to want to work with you. But never to do something heading in that direction is also a massive lost opportunity. And so look for the opportunity to connect to the bigger idea. Look for the opportunity to unearth fresh, penetrating insights that go beyond just what everyone in the category is thinking about. And there's so much that can be done there. But I just love that story. And they were the guy who was in charge of this was telling us the story, and we got teary-eyed. I mean, it's just really something super powerful there. And commerce can connect that way. But it's sad that kind of story is so powerful because of its rarity.
Yeah.
And I wouldn't want anyone ever to do this in an exploitive or in a just a dumb way, of course, or anything. But there is an opportunity to do better work, to really think about it, to think about the impact that you can have culturally in that way. And as a major brand, yes, major brands don't often enough recognize the kind of power they have to do something of that scope.
Well, that brings us to the end of our conversation with Adam Hansen and Matt Arnold about innovation and behavioral science.
Yeah, and it was a really rich discussion. I'm struck by several powerful themes that emerged today. First, let's make sure that this message is loud and clear, Tim. Innovation isn't just for creative types. It's a fundamental human attribute. We all are creative. We are all those artists in kindergarten. We just need to continue to be and think and allow ourselves to be creative.
Yes, we are. And as Adam put it, Homo faber socialis, the creative social species that is super empowering. That's us. We don't need to wait for permission to innovate. Innovation is part of our DNA. It's in our genetic code. Had to get that in there.
No, of course
Even
you
though
did.
cultural pressures and cognitive biases may suppress it sometimes.
And Tim, I was particularly drawn to Matt's framing of innovation as a craft that requires practice. We can't expect to generate breakthrough ideas on demand if we haven't built up that innovation muscle through consistent practice, right? Michael Jordan didn't get to be Michael Jordan by not practicing, right? Yeah.
That practice needs to happen both at the individual and the organizational level. I love the practical suggestions for middle managers, like creating safe spaces for ideation, celebrating small wins, and using diverse stimuli to spark new connections.
Yeah. The Dove Real Beauty campaign example that Adam gave, I think really illustrates how powerful innovation can be when it connects with genuine human insights. And that's
Yeah.
where behavioral science and innovation, in my humble personal opinion, truly intersect. Understanding human behavior deeply enough to help create meaningful change through innovation.
Let's not forget the importance of balance between exploration and execution, between creative thinking and disciplined implementation, right? We need both. Innovation requires both divergent and convergent thinking at different stages. So don't stop on one level.
That is very insightful, Tim. I couldn't agree more. We have to have both. We have to have I mean, I can come up with ideas all day long, but if we don't start working on them and get a process in place to do it, hey, I mean, you've seen me all the time with ideas around this damn show, and it's like, okay, Kurt, go for it, and then I never do. And there you go. All right, so with that, let's go and let's talk about some of the very practical tips
Okay.
or steps that we took away from this conversation with Adam and Matt. Let's walk through a few of them. So I will start, and
Okay.
I'm going to start going back to the beginning. Adopt an explorer's mindset. So
Mm.
explorers who discover new things, they didn't just go out there willy-nilly and like, woohoo, I'm just gonna sail wherever the sea takes me, right?
Right.
I'll just bring on some stuff. No, they were very practical about like where they were trying to go, what were the tools they needed to be. They knew it was dangerous to a certain degree, but they were careful and they took their time, Tim. They took their time.
I would also add that explorers look at a lot of things and they're curious about those things. And they learn a lot before they actually get to the point of where they actually are discovering something, right?
Are you talking about taking your time and exploring the problem before you
Yes.
go for the solution? Right. Yeah.
Absolutely. Okay. I'd like
What
to,
else?
I think that this idea of negativity bias is a really big thing to be aware of. We need to watch out for it. We need to be mindful of that it's going to be in our minds and in the minds of everybody around us, especially our leaders in corporations. So we need to be thoughtful about how we present things and gives us a good reason to be in the forness campaign, to be for something rather than against it. Right, that we can be more positive in the way that we think about things, that we frame things, especially when we're in the innovation process.
Yeah.
uh,
Use the yes and principle popularized by improvisation, right? And
yeah.
so you do that all of the time, and I really appreciate it. It's this idea of yes and that just allows us our brains to continue to be thinking and not be shut down. And
uh,
again,
uh,
I will go back to this idea from Matt about make innovation a craft or a discipline, where
uh-huh.
if you're putting in place this in trying to get it instilled in your organization, you're a leader in an organization, put in the processes around it, right?
Yeah.
Reward the behaviors around innovation. Don't penalize them or threaten people around that. If you want innovation, reward it.
Yeah, recognize people. Just support that innovative behavior. Absolutely. Um, a couple more things. Develop affinity groups or
Mm,
communities of practice. Like I thought this was a really great idea that came up. This bring like-minded people together, right, and let
yeah.
them solve problems. And it doesn't have to be a formal uh, thing. It can be an informal thing. But just by having people who care about the same issues, whether it's because they're doing the same practice at work or because they just love it, let them come together, support them in coming together so that they can create and innovate together.
Well, and I just yesterday I sent you an email that said, "Hey, I'm stuck. I don't know how to do this. Here's a trying to build this workshop. Can you help me?" And again, because you are in this kind of
Right.
area, you were able to bring up some really good ideas that like, oh, that broke through my little stuckness that I had there. So that was great.
That's
Um,
good.
Lift ideas or steal, whatever you want to call it, from other industries, from other businesses, other practices, other products, different pieces. I love this idea of always like read things that are outside of your normal trope and try to take
Yeah.
insights or lessons from that. You know,
Yeah.
look at if you're an accountant, maybe, think about going to a sales meeting, or getting, some ideas around that or vice versa. And,
Right.
they might not make any sense, but you can pull some stuff from those that helps just break out of that kind of silo that you're in.
Well, and as Woody Guthrie, the great American songwriter, who wrote "This Land Is Your Land," by the way, he
And
used to
this land is
say,
my land,
he used to say
from California to
to the
the,
New York Island.
yeah.
Yeah. Woody Guthrie used to say, good songwriters borrow ideas from other songwriters. Great songwriters steal them.
Mm, yeah.
Just
From the redwood forests, they steal
to
all
the
the
Gulf
way
Stream
to.
waters.
Yeah,
Yeah.
there you go. Okay.
Okay. Let's, one more from me, and that is just to have regular ideation sessions, right? Be specific. Don't try to boil the ocean. It can be really helpful just to get a small group of people together for a very specific reason, for a very specific person. And ideally, it would be in person, but get a diverse group of colleagues together and create a space for innovation if you can, because that would really be optimal.
Yeah, I mean, and even this idea of like regular hackathons, regular Shark Tank kind of pieces that we talked about
Yeah.
earlier, right? All of those. Have field trips. I love this idea of just getting outside of the office with the team
Yeah.
and walking around and using that as a way to spur ideas and thoughts, and you know get outside of the four walls of your building, your office.
Finally, recognize that innovation isn't just about technology or massive disruption, right? It can be small, incremental improvements that over time can create significant value, like writing out your grocery list in the order that you're going to come into those things in the market, or identifying a shortcut for a process at work that doesn't require reengineering or of an entire work stream, but maybe just a tiny tweak that could save a lot of people a lot of time.
Can you invent a grocery list that like knows my grocery
Knows your
store?
grocery
So,
store?
because I do that all the time. It's like, oh damn, I got that. I forgot that's back at the beginning, and it was at the end of the list, and I didn't see it.
I
And
hate that
now I
too.
got to go all the way back to the beginning. All right, and agreed. You and everyone who's listening understand this. You are creative. You are innovative, and you can be the ultimate adapter at your work. So now get out there and do it. Yeah.
That was very enthusiastic, Kurt.
I don't know. It was what it was. And we want to extend our sincere thanks to Adam Hansen and Matt Arnold for sharing their expertise and insights with us today. Perspectives that they brought have just given us so much to think about, and we appreciate the work that they're doing, their friendship, their valuable insights. And so thank you.
If you're curious about the work that they're doing, reach out to them. We've got their contact information in the show notes. Of course, guess what? You can contact us if you'd like to as well. Our contact information is in the show notes. And if you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe to Behavioral Grooves wherever you get your podcast, whether that's on YouTube or Spotify or Apple. Give us a rating or a review. Those ratings and reviews, they help other people discover the show. And we'd really, really love to hear your thoughts about the topic. If you got something to say, let us know.
And if you're interested in more conversations at the intersections of behavioral science and human behavior, as well as music sometimes added in there, I don't know why, but it is, check out our previous episodes at behavioralgrooves.com, or contact us on our Facebook page. It's the Behavioral Grooves community page, where we, by the way, have been asking a daily groove question and lots of fun interactions. And so please reach out. We'd love to hear from you there.
In upcoming episodes, we're going to be digging deeper into more applications of behavioral science in the workplace. So we want to encourage you to keep listening, keep checking out future episodes. But until then, keep thinking about ways of using innovation that came from this episode to help you find your groove.
Thanks for listening.